Welcome to End of Life University on YouTube. Today I'm sharing with you a conversation I had with Sallie Tisdale. She is a nurse and a writer, and we're talking today about her book, Advice for Future Corpses and Those Who Love Them. It's a great discussion. I think you'll really enjoy this one. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to this channel. Also, subscribe and leave a rating and review for the podcast wherever you happen to listen. And if you're inclined and able to make a small contribution to keep this channel on the air, you can go to eoluniversity.com/support. And there you'll find 3 different ways you can make a donation that will make a big difference. So thank you in advance if you choose to do that. Now we'll move on with my conversation with Sallie Tisdale. Today, I'm very happy to welcome my guest, Sallie Tisdale. Sallie is a nurse and the author of 10 books, including Advice for Future Corpses and Those Who Love Them, which we'll be discussing today. Her work has appeared in Harper's, Antioch Review, Conjunctions, Threepenny Review, The New Yorker, and Tricycle, among other journals. Sallie also teaches at Dharma Rain Zen Center in Portland, Oregon. And you can learn more about her work and the books she's written at Sallie with an IE, SallieTisdale.com. So Sallie, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I really enjoyed reading your book, and I know you've written many others, but Advice for Future Corpses is the one that stood out to me. So I chose it this year for my online reading group, A Year of Reading Dangerously, because I found it very helpful and informative. So
Thank you.
thank you for the book. I'm a little late to the party because it's been out for a few years, and I didn't even hear about it until I was putting my book list together. But
Well, thanks. No, I still hear from people pretty frequently. I hopefully if I've been helpful, it's not help that goes out of date. Yeah.
not at all, because when we're talking about death and dying, that's
Right.
it's ubiquitous, and
Right. Right.
it goes on and on. But how did you first, I know you're a nurse, and how did you get interested in nursing? But also it sounds like you've been a writer for most of your career as
So
well.
I'm a backwards person, and I knew I wanted to be a writer by the time I was about 19, but I didn't know how you could live as a writer. What does it mean to be a writer? And I knew I didn't want to be a journalist. I knew, because I tried that, and I knew I didn't want to teach in a graduate program somewhere. I wanted to write. I just wanted to write, and that's why I went to nursing school. And back then, in the early '80s, it was not easy, but it was easier to get into nursing school. I was one of the first BSN trained nurses coming out, and it was a flexible job. I mean, I think we're probably of an age, so I kind of came of age in the '70s when we had a prosperous economy, and there was a lot of looseness in society that we've lost because of economic changes. So I was able to do that. I was able to put together a part-time job as a nurse while I wrote, and work full-time when I needed to, and I managed to continue writing and support my family. And then I had the lucky discovery that I liked being a nurse. I think if I hadn't had the writing bug, I probably would have been a bacteriologist or a marine biologist or something. I have a real science bent, and I really like the challenges of nursing. I kind of think of it as my form of chaplaincy, because you really have to meet people exactly where they are, and you have to be willing to see all the tremendous differences that people bring to the table. So that's how I became a nurse, and I stuck with it with one break when I was writing all the time. And these days I'm working in a palliative care system. I'm an end-of-life nursing educator through the LNEC program, and mainly I'm doing caregiver education and case management.
Mm.
Right now I work in a facility that we own, that houses about 40 people with dementia or mental illness or both, and medical complications. So, every day is a new day.
Mhm.
There's
Yeah,
never a dull moment in a
that
place
that
like this.
that's such important work right now, and we are facing such shortages really of
Right,
personnel in those areas. But
right.
I think your work as an educator is crucial as well, because our whole society is really lacking in this foundational information
Mm.
about end of life issues. So,
Well, I'm teaching our caregivers, our marvelous, wonderful caregivers who have very little formal education. So they're expected to do so much, to step up so many ways. And the pandemic has made it, they've been forced to step up in ways that nobody predicted. And we've lost multiple residents to COVID, and many of the caregivers have gotten sick. And so they just deserve better. They deserve better training, and that's what I'm trying to do.
so true.
Yeah.
Well, tell us about advice for future corpses and what inspired you to write it.
Well, like I said, I took LNEC training, which is end of life nursing education curriculum. It's really designed to train nurses, but you can shift it and train lay people with it. I've also been a Zen teacher for a long time. I've been practicing Zen for 40 years, so Japanese Soto Zen Buddhism, and I've been a teacher for, gosh, going on 20 years. And I'm also a mother and a grandmother. And my life felt like it's kind of in a couple of different pieces. And this book allowed me to bring everything into one place. So I never write without that Buddhist point of view. It's the lens through which I see the world. And I have had a fair amount of experience with people dying, and I've also lost people that I love. And I think that's maybe the most important experience that you can have, to have actually been with someone you love as they die. It is an experience that many of us fear, and far too many modern people don't get to experience. It's such a separated part of our life, and so I wanted to bring that experience and sort of all of me to the page. And one of the discoveries I made as I was writing was how much fun I was having. And you work in this world, there's a lot of humor and there's a lot of wit at the end of life. A lot of filters get turned off, and you never know what's going to happen next. It's full of surprises. And I really wanted to convey that death and dying also can be filled with joy, that it can be filled with a way of being so completely present in the world and so completely present with another person, that love is the only response that we can have. I wanted to bring that to the page. Not, but I also wanted to acknowledge everybody's scared. And I don't know that the denial ever completely goes away. I'm basically aware of my denial in a new way. I'm not free of it. I mean, I know you're going to die. I know everybody else is going to die, but I don't entirely know that I'm going to die, that this precious me is going to go away. That's a hard thing to face. And when you're with people who have really faced it, who have really turned toward it and accepted it, it's profound. It changes you.
And I love that you mentioned bringing joy into death and dying, because that message is so largely missing in our contemporary society. I still think people who fear death and who speak about death in the lay public, those of us who work with it all the time are aware of
Yeah.
that aspect of joy, but the general public doesn't know that, and they need to hear that message so desperately.
No, we've been fed such a story about it, really starting many decades ago when the funeral industry became a profession, when suddenly there were professional morticians, and embalmers. It separated us from the intimacy of it so completely. And suddenly people were not dying at home anymore. They were dying in hospitals. And families were not taking care of the bodies professionals were taking care of the bodies. And so we just simply lack experience in a lot of ways. But I think many people, as I say in the book, sometimes when I feel grief, I feel at one with all the billions of humans in the world because we will all feel this. And every culture has rituals around it because it's so profound. And there is love and there's joy and there is humor as well.
Yes. Oh, yes. So true.
There's
And
a way that we can cherish each other when one is dying that we never allow ourselves to fully cherish. We're always a little protected, right? We're always a little defended against the possibility of hurt and rejection and abandonment. It's very deep human experience to just keep a part of yourself separate. And suddenly when someone's dying, you cherish people more deeply than you've ever cherished. You have nothing to lose. And when I train people, I like to remind them, we're always beginners. This death has never happened before. This one in front of you, this person, it's never happened before. It's never going to happen again. So on the one hand, you only get one chance, right? You want to do it right. But on the other hand, everybody's new to it every time. When my mother died, it was the one and only time I would be with my dying mother. When my best friend died, it was the one and only time I got to be with my best friend dying. And my death will be brand new when it happens to me. So we have to go into it with these sort of fresh eyes, so to speak.
yeah, I like that concept of the beginner's mind.
Yeah,
And I think sometimes if we, like medicine has a tendency to become far too prescriptive and to think, this is how you do it. Here's the protocol. This is what will happen. And forget that even though death and grief are universal, it's a unique experience, as you said, every time. So we always have to go in with an open mind
right,
and
right.
let it unfold however it does.
And in Zen, when we talk about beginner's mind, people people feel embarrassed about being a beginner, or they, we feel like somehow that's something to be ashamed of. But the beginner's mind is the mind that sees everything new, and that means being totally open to possibility. In fact, when you're in a beginner's mind, anything's possible. You have no idea what to do next. You're really open and really fresh. So one piece of advice I give people when they're going to visit somebody who's dying, and I got this from one of the original death doulas who I know. Um, he puts a chair outside the door and requires people to sit in it. I just like to tell people, stop at the door. Don't open the door. Stop at the door, take some deep breaths, and really ask yourself, what are you bringing into the room? Because as professionals, we tend to go in with pretty clear agendas, right? I'm gonna assess this, I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna change this. And that gets in the way of seeing what's really happening. So I try to just drop the agenda so that I can see with clear eyes. And it's hard to do. We're always moving to the next task. And if it's someone you love, you're coming in with tremendous emotional intent, sometimes great emotional tension, sometimes really just powerful feelings. And you may want to accomplish something in there. So it's good to know what you're bringing in the room and try to put it down.
Yeah, and that's just so important for those of us who have some sort of expertise, because too often, of course, we bring our expertise with us, but we may only be seeing through that lens, like you
Yeah,
were
yeah,
saying, and
yeah,
missing some of the most important things that are happening.
right.
Well, I was curious. I wanted to talk a little bit about Buddhism and death. I mean, my knowledge comes from having read the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying by Sogyal Rinpoche, but where what made such an impact on me was the idea that in Tibetan Buddhism, at least, people start preparing for death as soon as throughout their adulthoods. They start contemplating death and preparing to die because it's one of the most important passages that will happen for us. And that really struck me as, oh my gosh, like that's how we should all be living. We should all be able to think about our death from a young age on and be in that state of preparing for it. But I was curious, from your experience and your knowledge, has you talked about your denial a little bit, but has your how your Buddhist practices have helped you, or how they change how you look at it?
Right, right. And it's really all of Buddhism is about being ready to die because you're always dying. It's the Buddha taught that there's four things that we can't avoid: old age, sickness, death, and the fourth one is what variously called asceticism or practice or whatever, the spiritual path. Um, so from the very beginning, it has been old age, illness, and death. And like in Japan, you don't send a Buddhist priest doesn't go visiting the sick because they are considered harbingers of death in a sense. They go at the last moment to sort of help people through that gateway. So all of Buddhism has a certain degree of that. But in Zen, we really talk about how we die all the time. We die every moment. I am not who I was yesterday. I'm certainly not who I was 10 and 30 and 50 years ago. Those people are gone. That young girl, that child, that young woman, I have inherited things from their lives and their choices. Some things I have no clue where it came from, but it's not me today. So we spend a lot of time just facing impermanence. That's the word we usually use, is impermanence, that the self that you feel yourself to be is always changing and always affected by conditions, always being affected and affecting conditions. So there's no little pearl that's just you that never changes that you can take from day to day because we shift constantly. So that's a big help, is just really many years of facing the fact that I can't hold on to things, that everything changes, that I can't hold on to people or relationships or even myself, that everything turns over and changes. That's a very big help. And we do have practices. We have all kinds of formal practices around it. Um, I I really experienced it beautifully when my teacher died suddenly of a heart attack on the sidewalk right after meditation in the morning. It was so shocking.
Wow.
I mean, they took him off to the cardiovascular unit and they did open heart massage. It was awful. Um, but he died right there on the sidewalk. And we had 14 hours of people until over 100 people came to see him and to do these rituals at the bedside. We bathed him, we dressed him. It was really beautiful to watch how open people were to coming in and doing it. But we have rituals that last for years after a death if it's felt that if there's some unfinished business. Not that I think somebody's floating around for years. It has more to do with the living. Like all death rituals really have more to do with the living. So I'm just around it a lot. And a lot of the literature in Zen and throughout Buddhism addresses this inevitability. And we just deal with it on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes I say that death is the breath after the last one. You've seen people die and you know how soft and peaceful it can be. It can be, people have this idea that everybody who's dying is in uncontrolled pain and crying out, and that's not what it's like most of the time at all. It's very quiet and very soft and very slow. And I've been with people where I had to wait a couple of minutes to be really sure because they faded out so quietly. So it can be so undramatic. That's one of the surprises.
Yeah, I think that's so very true. Again, it's a misperception in society, and if only people knew, they would have less fear about being with someone who's dying or visiting and being there at that moment of death
Right.
if they could see what we have had the chance to see.
Yeah.
But
I do counsel family members sometimes who are afraid to visit they're like, well, she won't look the same, or she won't, no, but I don't look the same as I did yesterday. We are always changing. One of the things I do, and you probably do this too, is I try to normalize some of what they are seeing. Like noisy breathing is probably the biggest concern people have at the bedside. That's the question I get more than anything else. Is she in pain, and what can you do about this noisy breathing? She's gurgling, she's choking, and trying to normalize noisy breathing. Um, and really pointing out that it's not the same as difficult breathing, that this person actually looks very peaceful. They're just making some noise. Normalizing terminal restlessness and deathbed phenomena where people are picking, and that, yes, I've seen this before. This happens a lot. It doesn't mean she's suffering. But at the same time, just reminding people that this is your one chance. I think that's important. If you choose not to come and visit the person you love, that's your chance. Why let it go?
It, it's so true. And that because as you said, this opportunity to cherish someone, for the last time or in that last moment. Not the last time, because of course we can still cherish our loved ones after they've died, but just to be in their presence and be
Right.
cherishing them.
I still I still talk to my mom. She died when I was fairly young. Um, and we get along great now. I think it's she didn't live long enough that I could get through all of that young person issue with their mother. So we had to keep working on it. And we're doing fine now. So
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
yeah.
Well, I do appreciate in your book that you describe for people, just as you were saying, what it might be like when they come and visit a loved one who's dying at different stages of the dying process. Because for me, it seems like if we could just get people to do that, to come to the bedside of the people they love who are anywhere in the dying process, it would really pretty rapidly change how we approach end of life in our society,
Right.
because experiencing it opens up your mind and changes how you feel about it.
I wish there were more films of people dying. Um, I t- we have a program at our Zen Center of training ordinary, just lay people to be bedside spiritual companions for the dying. Not caregivers, but friends, spiritual friends. So it's a combination of both, um, bringing a spiritual awareness to the bedside and answering certain kinds of questions and managing difficult conversations, and the other half is what you're going to see. And I really wanted to show people videos of people dying, and I was surprised that I could not find these. I found videos of people almost dying or at the last moment, but then the camera turns off. Yes, it's an incredibly private and solitary experience on the one hand, but what a gift to be able to just give that view to people who have been denied it by our culture.
Mhm.
Um, there are
That's so
people. Go ahead.
I was gonna say that's so true, and I was thinking when we have, like, fictional movies or films that show a death, everyone watching knows that that's an actor who didn't really die,
Right,
and so they can carry on their denial because they know that they didn't actually see death, they saw someone pretending that they were dying,
right.
but
And
mm,
then they're going to do CPR wrong anyway.
yeah.
I've never seen CPR properly performed on a TV show. Um, have you seen the movie Dick Johnson is Dead?
Oh, yes,
I
yes.
really I often recommend this because that's exactly what they're doing. They're practicing for him to die. And he has dementia, so he's, you know, going along as well as he can to understand his own decline. And I really like that movie a lot.
Yeah, and it's his daughter who's filming it, right? And,
Right.
yeah.
She's practicing losing her father. I think it's a really lovely movie.
Yeah, and how interesting is that that's what we need to do. We need to be practicing with how do we negotiate with loss and our grief, and we would be better served by it through all of life if we did keep up that practice.
Our culture is really just like in preschool around some of these things. Actually, I think we've gone backwards. It used to be, you know about the 19th century practice of dressing up the dead as though they were alive, and their eyes are put open, and they're wearing clothes, and then you take photographs with them as though they were still alive. Which on the one hand you think, well, that's a little strange. But then you realize these people are handling the corpse of someone they love. They're no kidding around here. They know what they're doing. There's a culture an indigenous culture in the South Pacific where they mummify the dead because of their environment, and then they dig them up once a year, and they dress them and they parade them around, and they have a meal with this person and then put them back in. As odd as that sounds to us from our point of view, what we've done is just completely hide it. And how do you learn to live with something and confront and understand something if you never see it?
Yeah, it's so very true. I appreciate that you said we're just in preschool as we're trying to look at how we approach death and dying.
Right.
And one thing I wanted to ask you about as a nurse, we've been seeing these articles about all of our attempts at getting people to fill out advanced directives are not really changing the way people actually die. We're not moving the needle. And we've been working on this for a, a decade or two, trying to get people to do their advanced care planning. But is that actually too advanced a step? Is that like high school level, but people are still at preschool level in their understanding of
Yeah,
death?
in some ways it is very advanced because most people don't understand they don't understand what they're choosing. They don't know what artificial feeding looks like or means. They don't know what CPR really looks like or feels like, or how rarely it actually succeeds in someone who's terminally ill. They don't everything we know comes from television shows, and they're not terribly accurate. Um, so people are saying, I do want this or I don't want that without really understanding what that means. I find, like, I meet a lot of people my age who they all want to be DNR. They just think, oh, it'd be terrible to be kept alive, but that's not what DNR means. And I want to point out, uh, look at all the people who survived COVID because they allowed themselves, because they were ventilated. Think about chest trauma from a car accident. You can't just wholesale throw some of these things out. But on the other hand, keep those feeding tubes away from me. So, and that comes from experience. So what I have is an advanced directive. In Oregon, they're 4 pages long. They're still very blunt tools. So I have attached a 2-page letter to my advanced directive, which describes what I consider quality of life. And under what circumstances I would want life-saving things, and under what circumstances I would not. What would it mean to me to have a life that was unbearable? At what point would it be unbearable? And my representatives asked for this. They're 2 close friends. This is another thing. Never have the person closest to you in the world be your representative. People are always shocked to hear that, but that's the person with the most conflict of interest and the most emotional drama that they're going to ever experience in their life will be when you're asking them to make this difficult decision. So I think, spare the person you love more than anyone in the world, and don't ask them to make this decision. Let them just be there as the person who loves you. And, I quote in the book, I quote this chaplain who says that it should be a person who can stand up to authority and be kind of a son of a bitch sometimes. Because these environments where decisions like this are made can be very chaotic, very difficult, and very noisy in all kinds of ways. So I've attached a letter of my values and how I define this for myself, so that my hard-headed son of a bitch friends know what my values are when it comes to making those choices. I also have, and this is something we have at the Zen Center, a 4-page end of life plan, which addresses things like who I want in the room, who I don't want in the room, what kind of spiritual support I want, what kind of music I want to listen to, and so on. If I, you know, COVID's our best example. If I was suddenly sick with COVID tomorrow and suddenly not able to make choices for myself because that disease can go very fast, I might not be able to set those things up for myself. So I've put them down on paper. And it includes what kind of body disposal I want. People don't like to think about that, but it is, I think, the greatest gift you can give your family at the end of your life is don't force them to figure out what to do with your body. That is a very awkward object to suddenly have possession of. I see it all the time at work that here's this 95-year-old person with a number of medical comorbidities and no funeral plan, not a
Mm.
word. And if I have to call and deliver the news that somebody has died, half the time people say, I don't know what to do. Who should I call? I don't know, who do you recommend? How do we get to be 95 and not think about it? So I have part of my end of life plan is I have a friend who's a funeral director, so that's a pretty easy one. She knows what I want, but I recommend that everybody have some clue about what they want done with their body.
I think that's so important. And my mom who died at 89 she had spent like 5 years before she died kind of making her end of life plan and planning her funeral, speakers, the music. But it
Good
was
for her.
so helpful to us when we went to the funeral home that she had chosen. They'd met with her a number of times, and they
And
had
they
this
knew
whole
what to yeah,
little file of like, this is what she wants, and she picked out these flowers, and she likes these songs, and we were like, amazing. Like, there was so
that's
little
great.
work for us to do, and as her funeral unfolded, we knew she planned it. This was exactly what
This
she
is what she
wanted.
wanted. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's well, and so you said, how is this too hard for us? I think I think we can just never communicate and educate people enough around what to expect as you get older, what to expect, what you can expect from your healthcare team. What I'm sorry, that was my phone. Um, and what natural dying actually looks like. And putting it all together. So it's just education, 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 and the education has to start with how hard it is to face these things. People don't particularly want to face these things. They kind of come in sideways. I find to a workshop or a lecture, they come in a little bit tight. So one of the first things I often say to people is, of course you're scared. There's no wrong way to feel about this. I think that's an important message. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to be resentful or angry or curious. There's no wrong way to grieve. There's no wrong way to face your own death. It's like I said at the beginning. It's only going to happen once, so it's yours. Take the power that you can have over it. Daniel Callahan, the ethicist, if you know his work, um, I really like he talks about the only mastery we can develop for death is the mastery over what it means to let go of control.
Hmm.
Master the ability to lose control, because I have all these plans. I have pages and pages, and multiple people have copies, and it could come to naught. I know that none of this could come true. It might be because I get hit by a semi truck when I'm crossing the street, and it might be because no, I'm in another country and nobody who has those plans is anywhere near me, and it could be come to naught for all kinds of reasons. So you make these plans, you learn, you study, you get experience, and then the last task is really to open your hands and let go.
Hmm. Such a good point, which is so hard for us to do, but that is probably what our lifetime practice should be, is learning how to let go of things in all of life. Like, yes, make our plans, but that everything that we plan for ourselves in every area is likely to fall apart in some way or another. So,
Well, and this is the other great lesson that I've gotten from Buddhist practice, and it's part of that same lesson, impermanence. Everything changes. There's no predicting what the next moment will bring, so you have to come fresh. And we call it non-attachment. I like to think of it as open-handedness, of just being willing to you make plans and then you let go of the outcome after you've done everything you can do, um, and and see what happens. That way you can meet what really happens rather than the fantasy or the hope or the the preconceptions that we have about what will happen.
yeah, I really love that. And back and about my mom again, I was going to say when I was trying to help her fill out her healthcare advance directive, we spent hours and hours going over every possible scenario. What if you get pneumonia? What if you have kidney failure? What? And it at some point I realized this is insane. Like we're trying to plan for anything that could happen when it's almost infinitesimal the number of things that could happen. And finally, I just asked her, how would you like it to be on the day that you die? And she thought for a moment and she said, I'd like to be home in my own bed and I'd like you to be with me. And it was like, okay,
Okay,
that's all.
that I can do that.
That's all I need to know. And it guided every other decision from
Yeah,
then on
right, right.
because
Yeah,
I kept saying to the doctor, she just wants to be at home. She wants to go home. What should we choose that will help her get home? And then it was amazing when we
right,
simplified it down to just those bare basic wishes. It actually made all of the decisions
right.
easier.
I have I'm thinking of a client I have who is just turned 90 and her life goal was to be 90 years old. And she almost instantly started turning toward dying. Um, and is, has a comfort care, pulsed, which we is what we call them here in Oregon. Uh, no more hospitalizations, etc. So, of course, what happens? She falls out of bed, lands on her arm, breaks her arm. Um, Comminuted fracture of her arm. So she spent a few hours in the emergency room, but we very quickly were able to establish, and the emergency room doctor was very comfortable with saying, "We're not going to try to fix this. We're going to get her comfortable. We're going to put her in an arm brace, and she needs to go home. We're not going to try to put this poor lady through surgery." But that's the other thing is we had everything set up for her and then something like this happens. But because we had it all on paper and because we knew the family, that's the other thing. Knowing the family, nothing replaces the relationship, I think, that and to make sure that the person who has the relationship, that their wishes are very clear as well. I was going to say there are a couple of scenarios that I think we do need to talk about, even though we can't plan for everything. But one is the relationship between pain and sedation.
Mm.
Everybody says, I don't want any pain. And then, but do you want to be sedated? Sometimes we have to make a little choice between moderate, manageable pain and awakeness. And so I address that for myself. I'm a real little pain whiny baby. I don't like physical pain. I'm not tolerant of it particularly. Um, but I would be willing to do a 3 or 4 if I can be awake. And I don't think that's addressed often enough. I have another client who's dying, younger than me, who's dying of lung cancer. Um, he wants pain control, and we're discovering that the opiates make him very confused. And that's not what he wants. So we're in the process of trying to balance that. So I always want that to be addressed. And I also really want people to address the issue of solitude and companionship. I'm sure heard of the group No One Dies Alone.
Mhm.
Um, and my reaction, the first time I heard that, my reaction was, get out of my room. I might want to die alone. And I know lots of people who only died alone. I know it's anecdotal. I wish somebody would do the research, but it's so common that people die only when that person goes to the bathroom or goes to get clean linen. I've seen it over and over and over, and maybe it is that private and that special. My mother would not die until we got my father out of the room because he kept saying, "Don't go. Please don't
Mhm.
go." He'd lay himself across her and hold her and say, "Please don't leave me." And my sister-in-law at the time was a nurse as well, and we kind of made eye contact and said, "Dad, I think you need to take a break." And we got him out of the room, and she died in about a minute and a half as soon as he quit holding her there. So I also really want people to address that. Some people need more companionship than they're getting, and others need more solitude than they're getting.
And do you find like it you can't necessarily predict because some people who've been loners all their lives may be comfortable having people around them when they
Right,
die. It doesn't necessarily carry over. And so it's why we have to just be really sensitive and tuned in
right,
and and talk about it. But I've definitely seen the same thing. I've seen families that were so attentive. They made sure someone was there every single moment and their mother simply wouldn't die. Like she just she just kept lingering on and on and on, and I finally had to say, "Let's all go out in the kitchen and have lunch together and
that's
give
when she
her
died.
some space," and that's when she
And
died.
so we have to tell families, they instantly feel guilty. I wasn't with my mom when she died, and so I try from the beginning of the process with families to point out that this happens, and we need to make sure that this person has times of solitude as well, and or call it privacy if you want, as well as your companionship. And there's nothing to feel guilty about there at all. Um, you're here.
Yeah, and I think your conversation about pain management versus sedation, that's really important for families to hear because I think that would help with this misperception that hospice overdoses patients on morphine until they die. Because there's so many, I mean, it's such misunderstandings about how
Right,
morphine is used and how pain is controlled. If family members were part of that conversation and they understood what their loved one had asked for around pain, it seems like it would maybe
right,
help clear up some of those myths.
right. And people don't. I mean, most people aren't very familiar with morphine, and it's really helpful to just say, "This is our gold standard. We know this drug really well. This drug has been used like this for so long. I trust this drug, and it is our best choice." Um, and make sure that people understand how safe it is. And so from the beginning, I point out doses are going to go higher. It's going to change on a fairly frequent basis because people become tolerant. So don't get worried when you see higher doses. We're always going to be looking at the person to make sure it's what they need. Um, you say we're not overdosing people till they die, but I've certainly seen people cheerleading. Come on, a couple of people I work with are really good at going in and saying, "Come on, you can do it. Come on, Margaret, let go. You can do it." So
Yeah, that's part of that comfort level that you get with death and dying and understanding the work it takes, the process it is for someone who's trying to die
well,
and
and I'm glad you used the word work because Ira Byock calls it labor, like childbirth labor. And I really do sometimes think that that person in bed who is no longer in any social relationship with you, their eyes are closed, they're not responding to voice or touch, but they're still breathing. We don't know what that state of mind is like. And I try to avoid the word unconscious because honestly, I don't know if they're unconscious. Is it like sleep? Is it like fainting? Or is it just being so internally focused that that's all your attention? Because I think it is work. Dying is work. So I don't want to guess what a person's mindset is. I want to know that they're physically comfortable to the extent we can do it, and that I'm taking care of their other physical needs and giving them the message that the work they're doing is good work. you know. So that, means if family members are fighting, they need to do it in the hallway and managing the environment that way, but not guessing what's going on. It's just a mystery, kind of
Yeah.
a wonder and a mystery. So,
Yeah, so true. If we can be there and be comfortable with that mystery, it's amazing actually to
mhm.
watch and to see it.
I always start a workshop by asking people to write down their ideal death. Where would you be? Who's with you? A lot of people talk about being in a meadow in the spring with their family or in their own bed with their family. And then, of course, the next thing you have to do is tear that up because you aren't going to get to necessarily get that. But every once in a while, somebody decides they want to blow themselves up or they want to ram their car into a wall. They want to go out in a blaze of glory. Um, and I'm always struck by people who say they want to die in their sleep because for me it's like this is the last great adventure we get to have. I want to see it coming. I want to see if I've developed enough grace and enough agility in myself to turn toward it and really experience it because it is a mystery and I don't know what it's going to be like. I don't want to miss it.
Yeah, so true. I always think I have so much curiosity that I'm not gonna I'm gonna wanna actually see this taking place, and, it's my only chance. I wanna experience all
Yeah,
of it.
yeah. Although
Oh
I go ahead.
oh, I no, I was gonna change the subject, so if you
Yeah,
finish.
do that, because I could talk forever.
Oh, it's okay. I was gonna say go back to I appreciated in your book again, we did talk about this already, but for people who are planning to visit a dying person, you talked about in the last months of life versus the last days of life. And I just feel like that's really valuable information for anyone listening who's maybe there's someone they should be visiting, but they've been holding back because they're nervous or afraid. If you just share some of the advice that you have.
Well, number 1, people do change, dying does change the body, um, and not just the mind, but the body will be different, and that's okay. So, like I said, take that moment to think about what you're bringing in the room, acknowledge that you're afraid, but another I'm not sure if this is what you're looking for, but just say goodbye once. Don't say a dramatic goodbye every 3 hours in the last couple days of life. Again, people are inward turned. They're not there to forgive you for a past wrong. They're not there to make you feel better about their dying. They're not there to give you the goodbye that you need. They are there to do their own dying. So notice what you're trying to get from this person and let that go. Um, that's a hard message for people to hear, especially an estranged family member who really needs to be forgiven for something. I'm sorry, that's not what their job is. Um, I've seen family members come in and harangue a person in the last days of life, trying to get them to say something in particular that they want to hear. And I I really want to help people find that forgiveness elsewhere in another way. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
also that I love you so much. It's really hard to say goodbye. Do it once. It's really like watching my father be unable to say goodbye to my mother was really, really profound to me. It really taught me something and I don't think he ever said goodbye to her in his life. And he carried that. So being able to really acknowledge what's happening and acknowledge what you're hoping for and try to let some of that go, it's important. I do encounter families who just say, I'm not going in there. I'm choosing not to go in there. And that may be the best choice for that person.
Yeah, and
Sometimes
it, yep.
sometimes it just is.
For all we know, maybe it's the best choice for the dying
For the
person
I
as
know.
well.
There are a couple people in my family that I have put on my end of life plan as not wanting them there at the end, because I think they will be dramatic, or they will turn the attention on themselves, or they will argue. There's some way that I just don't entirely trust they'll be able to be quiet and graceful in that moment. And it's
Yeah,
not my job to make them feel better about that.
yeah, it's interesting, like, I observed with my mom when she was dying, she was, very devoutly religious, and so I came prepared, like, I have her Bible, I see all the passages she's marked, I'm gonna read that to her, I have this list of prayers, I have this list of, like, Christian songs that I can play, and every she didn't want any of that. She didn't want the music. Right away, she said, "Turn that off." And I said, "Should I read to you from the Bible?" And she said, "No." And no, don't pray for me. It was she wanted none of it, and I was completely surprised, but I realized, who knew? We can't predict
Sure.
what is going to be right for a person.
She was doing what she needed to do, and we don't, we just never know sometimes. My dearest friend who died of breast cancer, we saw it coming for 4 years. I was her healthcare representative. I'd helped her pick out a casket. We did a natural burial, so she had um a biodegradable casket, and we had had all those conversations. And at the end, she chose to go to the hospital, to the emergency room. She begged her husband to take her in and keep me alive.
Mm,
So after 4 years of planning for her death, at the last moment, I was really surprised um, that she wanted CPR. So I felt really upset and resentful and angry, and I wasn't there, and I had such mixed feelings in my grief, because I was supposed to be there as she quietly passed away, and I had to kind of hit myself upside the head and say, it's not your death, it was hers. She didn't have to do anything for me. She didn't have to make it be what I wanted it to be. That
it's
was
so
another good lesson.
yeah, and it's such a good example that we can try to plan in advance, but we honestly have no idea what it is that we're making plans for, or how we will feel about it, or what space we'll be in at that
Right.
time. So,
She thought she was ready for that last day, and she just turned out not to be.
yeah.
And so I have to assume that Carol did what she needed to do.
It's that perfect example of letting go of the outcome and not being attached for ourselves and for our loved ones, whatever we go through with them. So another reason for support people to not beat themselves up if, oh gosh, my mom or my friend's death didn't happen the way they had hoped it would, or the way they wanted or dreamt of it, because so much is out of our control and we can't necessarily make things happen a certain way.
Well, and you work in hospice, so there are many limitations to hospice. And one of the things that people don't even stop to think about is, does a wheelchair fit through the bathroom door? Is Oh, the bathroom's on the second floor. How are we going to do that? Where do I put this hospital bed? Oh, a commode in the middle of the living room. And are you strong enough to help this person stand up and go to the bathroom at 3 in the morning when they're having diarrhea? It's like, let's get realistic about what's really required to do bedside care. Many people, can you get the time off work? Are there small children? Is there a second place for people to sleep? There are so many things that people don't stop to think about when they just say, I want mom to come home. Well, that's going to involve quite a bit of stuff. Again, something people used to know how to do, to center that in the family, and people didn't used to go, on hour-long commutes for 10-hour shifts, and we used to all be together. So it was somewhat easier, but now in our fragmented and separated society, it's often very difficult. And the physical care can be harder than people realize. So one of the big myths people have about hospice is you're going to come in and do all of that, right?
Mhm.
I'm gonna have hospice, so I assume that means there will be caregivers 24 hours a day. No, the family is the caregiver. And so many people don't really have family nearby.
Yeah, it's so true, and there may be one person who shows up, but then that person is gonna give 24/7 care,
Right,
and
right.
and they'll be overwhelmed and broken down pretty quickly by that.
I talk in the book about the good hospital. I work in a good system, and there is a very good hospital in our system. And when I worked oncology in the hospital, and I saw many people have very good, peaceful, comfortable deaths in the hospital, in a private room with that we allowed to be whatever environment they wanted, with nursing 24 hours, making all the difference in the world. The idea that it's going to be a bad death if you're in the hospital is that's just wrong. Not necessarily. And that it'll be a good death at home, definitely not necessarily.
That's so true, so we need to expand all of our options and our definitions of things because it's far more than just saying, well, we think hospice sounds like a great idea. There's so much involved in it, and we have to be preparing people honestly before they take that on so they know
Right,
what it entails.
right. I have to go to work here.
Yes, I know. I know. So we're going to have
I
to
have to get
wrap
going.
this up and say goodbye, but I want to thank you so much, Sallie. Thanks for the book, Advice for Future Corpses and Those Who Love Them, because it's a wonderful book. So I encourage people to get it. And thanks for giving me your time to talk about it today.
Well, thank you for having me, and I hope you guys enjoy the book.
Thank you very much. And we'll talk again sometime and good luck with your busy
Okay.
day. And
All right.
all right. Bye. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Sallie Tisdale. I really had a good time talking with her, and I think you would also really like to read her book. So you may want to check that out. Go to find a link in the description for this episode. And again, remember to subscribe if you haven't already. And also be sure to tell other people about this channel and recommend some of these episodes to people who might enjoy listening or learn something that they need to know. So I'll be back next week with another episode. And until then, take care. Bye bye.